the problem with Coleman Hawkins in this whole discussion is he's gone from like the most interesting at the beginning of the year or like the biggest target for fans because the team was struggling and he publicly, everybody knows how much money he's making, to now it's like we're in this development mode and you know that Coleman Hawkins' career is done. Like he's not going to be coming back. So he becomes kind of like less interesting. You're like, yeah, he generally plays hard and plays well every night, but like what else is going on around him? And this season's lost now. What else can you bring back beside him?
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Hello and welcome into another edition of 3MA. I'm John Kurtz, joined by Derek Young and Cole Manbeck. Today, we'll break down K-State's loss in Lawrence. Pretty competitive, 84-74. After falling behind 14-0, K-State outscored Kansas by 4 the rest of the way. So there is a lot to talk about here. Some positives, finally, in a season that has not been filled with very many of them. Raise a glass to our friends at Holiday Distillery. They've got your hookup with Ben Holiday bottled in bond bourbon. They've got 360 vodka. So if you're having watch parties for basketball the rest of the way, men and or women, if you are going to Bramlage, have a little something to pregame. And if you're just hanging out on a Friday night, Ben Holiday bottled in bond bourbon and 360 vodka is the way to go. Okay, so, man, it looked like a couple minutes into that game that it was going to be a complete and total disaster. Falling behind 14-0, nobody hitting shots, settling for threes. And then, K-State looked fairly tough, played one of the better games of the season after that, certainly from an offensive standpoint. And I will preface all of this discussion with, we understand, the team is 7-10. This is a lost season. But what you're looking for now at this point, I think we've already kind of officially turned the page with the last couple of shows saying, what you're looking for now is some hope that it's not going to completely bottom out and you're going to have to do a total roster overhaul again this year. And you can find some positives from guys who've stuck around or could stick around. And I do think we started to see some of that, at least with this team. Certainly David Castillo highlights that, but I don't know, at least it was better than what it looked like it was going to be a couple minutes in, DY.
There's that, and there's the element, in my opinion, that at least through 6 Big 12 games at this point, I believe they're 1-5 in the conference. That's not a good record. Obviously, we know that they didn't want to be here. Folks listening don't want to be here, but it's like this is very weird to say, I know. But it's like a better 1-5 than I anticipated at this point, to be quite honest, because I expected numerous blowouts, just mailing it in, just absolute getting crushed in certain games, not covering. They've actually covered the last 2 games, surprisingly, stuff like that. But if you get away from the cynicism, frustration, and disappointment that the season has been, is, and will be from a results standpoint, if you look deep, there are signs. I'm a little stunned by it, but this team has some fight left in it, and they keep showing that by not going away. How many Kansas State teams do you guys know in the past that would have lost that game by 30? And yes, I know some of that is probably Kansas, and they're not typical Kansas too. And folks still have them in the top 10. That's not a top 10 team. I'm not sure that's a Big 12 title contending team, if we're being completely honest. But the aura that is Allen Fieldhouse, the aura that is the Sunflower Showdown, and what Kansas State becomes in that game, I thought it was almost a positive thing that they actually fared better than how many Kansas State teams in a row that have gone in there and just completely laid an egg and had no chance. Now, this one still had no chance because they got down 14-0, and even 20-4, I think was the biggest deficit, or at least the most deflating one. And still, they get back in the game. They pull within 6, right? how much time was left on the clock, maybe 6-7 minutes, I want to say. So in ways, I'm positively stunned by the way that they hung around. And you, like John said, you also had the pockets of potential development and guys that are going to stick around, especially David Castillo. When he got just a little bit of confidence, that dude took off a little bit, and you even saw the emotion on his face that he was feeling good about himself. And it wasn't just the offensive end. People have criticized his defense and say he'll never be a good defensive player. That dude disrupted a lot of what Kansas was trying to do in the last 10 to 12 minutes of the game. So it's weird, but I kind of walk away thinking this team is probably doing more at this point than we ever thought that they were capable of or were willing to do.
Look, historically, as you guys know, and most of our listeners know, what happens in Allen Fieldhouse is KU often gets off to a big run. When K-State goes in there, they fall behind big. They make a run back into the game to cut it to 6-5. I was there once when Frank Martin fell down 18-3. I think K-State came back, cut it to 3. And then what typically happens is KU then goes on a surge at some point in the second half, pulls away, and wins by 20 plus. The difference with this game, was that K-State didn't allow that second half surge to really occur. In fact, they actually kind of continued the fight to get it down to 6 points. It was 70-64 with 4:37 left in the game when Hassan hit that 3, and they didn't let KU just run away with it. Now, was there really any game pressure really on KU? Like, I don't think any of us ever felt like K-State was going to win that game. Right now, we're just looking for some simple things like that, though. Like, show me that you care, show me that you fight. I wasn't able to watch the game. I was in the Chiefs parking lot at Arrowhead Stadium for the playoff game on Saturday. And so we were checking the score sporadically, and we checked it a few minutes in, saw it was 14-0, and we all looked at each other. We go, boy, let's see what this team responds with, because I think most people thought 14-0, this team's going to completely lay down and quit.
Especially the way this team is shown sometimes.
Yeah, so you could imagine I was pretty stunned when we checked again, and it was 32-24. And then we kept checking, and it was like, oh, okay, KU hasn't gone on that big run to pull away. I think the most they started to pull away by was like 13-14, and then K-State would cut it back down. So that was encouraging. Like, this team showed against Texas Tech that it cared, a game that they easily could have won. And then they come out and did not lay down when things got out of control early in that game and fought back in it. And then Jerome Tang saying after the game that they had their 2 best practices of the season heading into that game, and Coleman Hawkins, giving some good answers in the press conference. And those are just words. Like, you got to follow it up with actions. And the thing with this team is they got to show us consistently over a larger time frame here that they're going to do it and lay it on the line. But some positive things, certainly. Again, I didn't watch the game. I have the numbers from the game, and some of it still is very disappointing and frustrating, and there's certainly some good things. I mean, we can get into those as we talk.
Oh, yeah, it's another game where they didn't play 40 minutes again, right? They played 36.
Yeah, and I was going to say, too, I mean, to play devil's advocate a little bit, like, yeah, I don't think much of this Kansas team, certainly relative to the Kansas scale that you would be grading on, which is definitely a curve, right? But I don't know. I think Kansas fans would tell you the same. They're not very enamored with this team at all. Also, you have guys like Coleman Hawkins, for instance, I thought played really hard and played a very good game. He's the type of guy, like, he said before the season, the thing that he was looking forward to most when it came to playing in the Big 12 was playing in Allen Fieldhouse. So, like, you knew that you were going to get a good effort out of him. Like, what happens when it's a, Tuesday night home game against a team in the bottom third of the Big 12 standings? Like, can you get the same type of effort there? So just to play devil's advocate on that front a little bit to what Cole was saying, I guess, too, I mean, you could say whatever you want. And I thought Coleman Hawkins had a great answer after the game in the post-game press conference when he was asked about, like, hey, what do you came to K-State obviously to do more than what's happening right now. Like, what's kind of the attitude? And he was like, hey, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to try to win games. I'm here to win games. I'm going to try and win as many as I can, no matter what the circumstances are right now. So to be determined, but, for one day, yes, that was certainly encouraging to see, especially with how the game started. I think that's the key point, because when you do get down 14-0, that could zap all of the energy out of there. And Yeah, I even thought like, you got on Yenso when he got in and played in the second half, like gave you some pretty good minutes, and everybody seemed to be playing pretty hard and pretty motivated by the atmosphere and environment they were in.
Like you said, that's also 6 games in. What happens if you're 4-13, 4-14, and you're playing Colorado at home on a Tuesday, right? We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, guys, the thing with this team, though, that is they're just kind of an enigma because they held Texas Tech, a top 10 offense in the country, going into the game on Tuesday night. They held Tech to their worst offensive rating of the season, only to allow KU to post its best offensive rating in 17 games in the 2024-25 season. K-State allowed 1.31 points per possession. It's the highest points per possession allowed by a K-State team since the pandemic season, when K-State allowed Baylor in 2 separate games to post offensive ratings of 146.3 in December of 2020 and 1.37 points per possession in January of 2021. If you take away the COVID season, you have to go back to February 3rd, 2018, and 89-51, not one loss at West Virginia, to find a higher points per possession allowed by K-State than what occurred in Lawrence on Saturday. And the thing with this, guys, is like we talked about the defense, and I was hoping they maybe turned a little bit of a corner against Tech. But now K-State has allowed the 2 highest points per possession games by an opponent in the Tang era this season. They both occurred this season, and they both occurred in the last 9 days. The 1.31 points per possession were the most by KU since its season opener of the 2023-2024 season. So last year, when they had nearly 1.5 points per possession against North Carolina Central. That's a span of 50 games. It's the 3rd highest by KU since December 1 of 2020 versus Seton Hall, and it's the highest by a KU team in a Big 12 game since 2020. So we can talk about some things that are positive on the offense, but I think it's important to call out again that K-State's defensive rating on the season, according to KenPom, is now 103.4, the worst in the Big 12, 111th nationally, and the worst by a K-State basketball team in the KenPom era. So, I didn't see the game. You guys could give a better answer as to why they struggled so much defensively. Maybe it was KU just being elite. Hunter Dickinson, DeJuan Harris, Zeke Mayo obviously lighted up against K-State, but that was disappointing. And then 43% offensive rebounding rate allowed by K-State, the 3rd highest of the season the Wildcats have allowed. It was KU's 2nd highest offensive rebounding percentage this season. K-State was outboarded 35-25. It's the 3rd straight game they've been out-rebounded by double digits, and over the last 3 games, their opponents have collected 114 boards to K-State's 69, an average margin of 15 per game.
Second chance points is 17-8. So you'll love that. Like you said, it's a lot of points in the paint. I mean, it's a lot of paint stuff right now. When you talk about in offense, they're not getting it into the paint enough. In defense, they're not keeping it out of the paint. They're not keeping it out of the middle. Like, it's a no middle defense that doesn't keep the ball out of the middle. So now Kansas did have some guys play in over their head. Zeke Mayo, and we'll put it this way, a lot of that Kansas offensive explosion happened in the first 4 to 6 minutes of the game. I mean, Zeke Mayo was in double figures before I think we even had an actual media timeout. So, like, it was
also the beginning of the second half, because Hunter Dickinson scored like 10 straight to start the second half, and K-State's offense had heated up by that point, but they were just trading baskets there for a while at the beginning of the second half. Kansas had, I thought the best offense Kansas was running was the first 5, 6, 7 minutes of the second half. And I mean, they just had no answer for Dickinson at all at that point.
I mean, really only 3 guys scored for Kansas. That's the funny thing. Hunter Dickinson, DeJuan Harris, and Zeke Mayo. They combined for what? I'm trying to do quick math here, but 64 of the 84 points. I mean, good gracious. It's 3 guys that you just couldn't stop. It's not like they were really diversifying or sharing the ball all that much. The next closest guy is 7 by AJ Storr, who hasn't done anything all year. So on top of the worst defensive efficiency in the Jerome Tang era, it was the best offensive efficiency of the season. I know you probably were going to get into that at some point. It was the number 1 offensive performance by Kansas State this season. What I will say is they're still not getting it into the paint enough. Some people will be like, oh, look at all these threes that they missed. They were good looks. Yeah, they were good looks. But there's a difference between a good look off of 1 pass and a good look off of 3 or 4 passes that also gets the ball into the paint first and foremost. So there's a difference in what these good looks considered to be. And the ones where they're getting multiple passes instead of just one and getting an open look, they're making. the ones where it's just one pass or not even a pass, and they're just chucking a perimeter shot that they happen to think is going to, they'll miss. I mean, it's that simple. And I think I had the stat at halftime. I might be wrong here. I might have the numbers twisted. But then you got to look at their 2-point numbers. I believe Kansas State was 11 of 14 from 2-point range in the first half, and they even finished 21 of 33. I mean, look at your percentages a little bit. Now I know you do that with the threes, and the three, it's analytically maybe the 3-point shot still has more value because you make 6 threes, it's 18 points. You make 2, you only make 11 twos, it's 22. There's not a whole huge difference. I know there's math there, but man, from an efficiency standpoint, if they kept going to the 2-point line a little bit, and I'm not saying take mid-range jumper or mid-range jumper, but get it into the paint, because obviously that was what was working. And again, it was the number 1 offensive performance of the year anyway. So I'm really quibbling here, but it's just like, man, look at the numbers. You don't have to chuck, 15 threes and a half.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned it. K-State went 21 of 33 on twos. The highest 2-point percentage allowed by KU this season was 59%. K-State goes 64% from 2. With 12:45 left in the game, DY, I made sure I checked the score on my phone. I took a screenshot of it because K-State was 16 of 22 on twos at that time, 73%, and they were 2 of 17 on threes. And I'm thinking to myself, they're shooting 73% from 2, and they're shooting under 10% from 3. Why are they shooting so many threes comparative to twos? The ratio should be larger. Although to that point, over the next 8 minutes, K-State went 4 or 6 from 3 to pull within 70 to 64 with 4:37 left in the game. So I've quibbled about this for a while. K-State allows opponents to go inside and dominate them and manhandle them too much and just pound the paint. And K-State doesn't get enough paint touches and work the middle of the opposing defense and get it inside. And when they do get it inside, I don't think they do a good job of fighting through contact and drawing contact, et cetera. That's why they're 282nd in the country in free throw rate. To your point, though, 1.16 points per possession, the most allowed by KU this season. KU's 4th nationally in Ken Palm defensive rating, and that's after Saturday. They have a defensive rating of 89.7. The Jayhawks were number 1 in the country in defensive rating in the prior 10 games heading into Saturday. That's according to our guy Parker. And KU had held 10 of their 16 opponents to under 1 point per possession heading into Saturday. So certainly some good things from Kansas State's offense, specifically a 7.8% turnover rate, the lowest K-State had this season, the lowest forced by KU this year. K-State only 5 turnovers. That's encouraging. And only 3 of the 5 turnovers were actually credited to a K-State player, because you guys can tell me this. I'm assuming 2 were shot clock violations, which don't get credited in the final stats to an individual player. But Doug McDaniel, 4 assists, 0 turnovers. David Castillo, no turnovers. Those are encouraging things.
Yeah, they don't have anybody that drives to the rim. Doug every once in a blue moon, but I just feel like the guards are always too scared to drive it. Certainly Castillo is right now. CJ Jones just hasn't been very good. Doug every now and then will give it to you, and obviously Brendan Hassan that's not his game. He's never going to do it. So I think that's a big part of the problem when it comes to the twos. And they're just always going to settle for a bunch of threes, and they're not as good a 3-point shooting team as we're kind of sold on. What the big focus was going to be this year was getting better at 3-point shooting. So, I digress. Here's some good news for you. All 3 of us wearing home field apparel today. So didn't even coordinate it, but it just so happened to work out that way. I got a DM about the pullover that Cole is wearing with somebody asking me about it the other day. So it seems like those are certainly quite popular. So Cole's got that on. DY, I couldn't tell who you were wearing today.
Arkansas.
Oh, it's Woo Pig Suey. Okay.
I thought it said Wood.
Woo Pig Suey. They're worse than Kansas State.
That's what I was going to say. Did they finally win a conference game? Like, why are you?
No, they're still goose egg.
Yeah, they lost to Missouri by like 18, right? On Saturday. They're 0-5 in the league.
Yeah, they're the other expensive basketball team that can't win.
Indiana is struggling too. Yeah. I think in general, that whole, buy a total new roster in the portal thing is people are figuring out that's you got to do it a little bit differently.
Yeah. Texas Tech football, we'll see what they can do.
Yeah, maybe a little bit different in football because there's so many players. It's not like you buy like literally the whole roster.
A little bit different, but they bought a lot of football roster, and I still don't think they have a quarterback. So we'll see.
Yeah, Well, yeah, they were mentioned for Carson Beck there for a hot minute, so apparently they don't think they have a quarterback either. Anyway, I don't know what Home Field Apparel thinks about the Texas Tech quarterback situation, but they do have 100-plus teams there that you can get some great gear for. They've got 50-plus K-State designs, including that pullover that Cole has or the hoodie that I am wearing. So make sure you get to homefieldapparel.com. Use promo code 3MON24 for 15% off your first order. That's promo code 3MON24 for 15% off your first order. And we are back in just a moment.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
So to me, the obvious top storyline here from this game, and I know you look at the box score, somebody might look at the box score and be like, this guy's got 6 points in 23 minutes. Like, what are we really talking about here? But I would tell you the top story from the game, brought to you by our friends at Alenco, ALENCO home.com for all your home improvement needs, is David Castillo. And what David Castillo did, a guy who has struggled mightily and was coming off of a performance where, to be honest, it felt like Jerome Tang wanted to prove a point down the stretch against Texas Tech and kind of just took a loss for the sake of proving the point that we're going to play David Castillo because he gives effort and plays hard. They scored no points in the final basically 6 minutes of that Texas Tech game. Castillo came back, stuck a couple of threes, defended really well, had a nice steal. Did try to go take it up to the rack on that, got swatted away, but at least, saw him go to the rim. We have not seen a whole lot of that this year, but just seemed like a much more confident player after he saw the ball go through the hoop. So, if you were sitting there thinking like, hey man, he just came off of a game that's going to make his mentality very much in question because of what happened against Tech, and now you're going into Allen Fieldhouse, toughest arena to play in the country. He certainly acquitted himself very well and gave you some reason for hope.
Once the lack of confidence kind of diminished, the indecision and the part where people were starting to question whether he was ever going to be playable or was fit in at this level washed away really quickly when he became confident. So you at least got the glimpses and signs of why this kid was a high-level prospect at this point and can still have a really, really good college basketball career. You were able to see what he can do and why people do like him and still like him once he became confident, because then he knocked down shots. Then he showed emotion. Then he started to be a leader. Then, the maturity came through. He wasn't turning it over. He was actually defending you too. Really clutch deals. I don't know if he got the credit for him, but it was a great play by him as well. The light bulb came on, and yeah, people will say, well, look at that box score. He didn't do much. It was a huge step in the right direction. And I will argue that going turnoverless, which he did in 23 minutes, is still a really, really strong sign for a true freshman in Allen Fieldhouse. So those are the things that kind of go into play for me. One caveat, I thought him playing with Doug McDaniel on the floor more probably did help him.
I think it's beneficial for him to play with another point guard, guys, to where he doesn't have to be the primary ball handler the entire time. It alleviates a little bit of game pressure off of him. So I do think that's an adjustment maybe they make moving forward, and they play him. I think there was a game earlier this year where they actually were playing Doug, CJ, and David Castillo out on the floor at the same time, and David looked a little bit better and more comfortable out there. The thing about David Castillo, look, I'm trying not to overreact to one game because against Texas Tech, it was obviously a massive struggle, but the thing you love about David Castillo is he's going to put in the work, and he's got the intangibles and the leadership and the maturity for a freshman to really develop potentially. And so, yeah, he's not an athletic freak. He's not going to blow by you. But you know what? And I'm not comparing the two, but Jacob Pullen wasn't an athletic freak either. He was a guy that devoted himself and worked hard and became a great player. And so David Castillo has those intangibles where effort's not going to be an issue. He's going to put in the work behind the scenes. And that's why I think he's going to be a quality player long term. And these game reps are going to be instrumental and valuable to him in his future. As you look ahead and think about, where this thing goes and trying to look for any glimmers of hope in the last 6 to 8 weeks of this basketball season, is the one thing I really want to see is things really start to click for David Castillo. So you can point to that guy and be like, you know what, that's our point guard of the future. That's a guy we know that's going to lay it on the line every night, and he's going to lead this program through the off season and kind of become your Marquise Noel in terms of leadership down the road. I mean, I think he has those intangibles. We've been blown away by him when we spoke to him before. I think everybody's blown away by David Castillo when they interact with him. So, yeah, that's certainly a positive. Again, I didn't see the game, but I was texting with you guys about it. Seeing the box score, seeing him hit a couple threes, ending that streak of 0 for 17 from three that he had been on, and then no turnovers in Allen Fieldhouse, and no turnovers against DeJuan Harris. Right? I mean, DeJuan Harris is a really good defender, a veteran player. Can take advantage of you, and David Castillo, by all accounts, played really well in Lawrence, which is a great sign.
Good or bad, and there's still going to be some bad this year. A lot of growing pains from David Castillo that he still probably needs to muddle his way through. He should be playing 25, 30 minutes a night the rest of the way.
Yeah, I would agree, and I also think it is a key point that you hit on. Like, getting him out there with somebody else and Doug that can handle the ball better is certainly key, because it just felt like against Texas Tech, and sometimes this year, like, it could be a struggle just for him to even initiate the offense, and you wind up with possessions where he's just dribbling around for the first 20 seconds of the shot clock, and that's just not going to be effective really for anybody. So hopefully you're figuring some things out along the way. DY, what'd you think of Ugo? He scored 9 points in 15 minutes, and he is, when you talk about not being able to score in the paint, he is really helpful, because there are, a couple times, every time he plays a long spurt, they get a couple of just lobs up to him, and for like Doug, who has been very hit or miss in terms of finishing when he gets up to the rim, the guards who have generally been afraid, like so much, like penetrate and then kick it back out or drive back out. It's really helpful to have a guy with his skill set and athleticism that you can just throw the ball up to finish. And that's one of the things I think we hoped coming into the year could be really effective for them. You can see the talent. I think that's just like the frustrating thing for me, is like you see these spurts where you see the talent with him, and it's like, God, why couldn't this have worked out this year? Would have been a really, really helpful, valuable piece.
Couple of things with Ugo, Gunna, and Yenzo is, one, you're right. Like, he seems to at least flash offensively to be able to kind of be a force, at least around the rim in those settings. Like, he will, if you play him for 8 to 10 minutes or 15 like they did, it seems like he'll go 2 of 3, 3 of 4 from the field and get you a few buckets. I just have an issue with him a little bit with everything else. They put him in a ball screen, and he had no idea. He had no chance to defend a ball screen at the top of the key. Like, there was, KU put him in that. It was like putting him in a blender. Like, they were going to score almost every time. He only got 2 rebounds in those 15 minutes. Like, you can't just go 4-4 from the field in 15 minutes and call it good. Like, there's other ways to impact the game that he's not able to do right now. He can't. If he gets on the floor, people are just going to put him in a ball screen, and it's probably game over for the defense at that point. And if they're also not rebounding the ball, then yeah, 4-4, just, to me, it's not going to be good enough. And that's probably been the tussle that the coaching staff has had throughout the year of whether to play him or not. And do you keep investing in him? I would keep investing in him as long as he's going to keep investing in you. And that's how I would approach just about any player left on this roster. And
well, that part of the reason I ask about that is because they seem to have made the choice that that's what they're going to do, because his 3 highest minute totals of the season by far, the last 3 games, 18, 21, and
I'm okay with it.
15.
I'm okay with it because, like everybody else, he's got to work through that and figure it out. And if he's going to invest and do the right things, then I have no problem with putting him on the floor and figuring it out. But he better be doing the right things, is all I would say.
Actually, you know what? I say that. I'm sorry, Cole. I say that. Actually, he didn't play at all against Texas Tech. So, again, that speaks to the inconsistency of this whole thing. But 3 of the last 4 games, he's played 15-plus minutes, which he had not done the entire year before that. And then there's a total no-show. He's not playing at all against Texas Tech. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I had wondered with Tech if it was a matchup-driven thing, the way Tech plays offensively, and they're such a good three-point shooting team, if they just didn't feel like that's the type of fit for a game style for him. KU is a game that should be a fit because of Hunter Dickinson. Like, that's a guy, and Badunga as well. Like, those are guys that Onienzo, again, who came into the season with the second highest shot block rate in college basketball last year, behind only Clifford Amore, the other guy K-State chased in the portal that was a center. It's a guy that set the Rupp Arena record with 10 blocks in a game against Ole Miss last year. And he's just, The thing that I see, guys, is this. All right. I see Hunter Dickinson go 12 of 19 from the floor, 25 points. I'm thinking to myself, if Anienzo's on the floor 15 minutes, he should be able to body up Hunter Dickinson and to defend him. The thing with Anienzo is, yes, incredibly efficient over the last 3 games. He's 9-9 from the floor in those 3 games. He's played 54 minutes in the last 3 games that he's been in. The problem I have, guys, is in those 54 minutes, he has 6 rebounds and he has 1 blocked shot.
And we know about his ball screen defense. Yeah.
Yeah. 1 blocked shot and 6 rebounds in 54
That's probably
minutes.
why it's his 1 block shot, because teams are just putting him in the ball screen, so we can't get to the rim.
Well, I would say this about the way K-State defends, guys. They got to stop switching on ball screens. Like, you hedge, you got to fight over the top and fight through the
They don't
screens.
fight. They don't fight enough over the top. I don't even think they all actually switch, in my opinion. I just don't think the guards are fighting enough over the top.
Well, they constantly, like, they switch. Like, they'll just hand off defensive assignments that
they do, but not necessarily on a ball screen, right? Yeah.
They do it all the time. I mean, that's my biggest issue with the
Coverage that they don't tag the big. Like, hedge. It's hedge.
Sometimes, but I mean, you watch them just completely unnecessarily switch defenders. Like teams aren't even really doing a screen, to your point, and they're doing a dribble handoff in case they don't switch it. How many times do you see K-State end up with a guard on a 7-foot center at the start of a possession, not even after like 15, 20 seconds? And so that's an issue I have. Watch a lot of other teams. Yes, there are some teams that switch a lot. Watch a lot of other teams as well that'll fight through the screens, fight through it over the top. They'll hedge and then they'll drop and stay with their guy. Like, K-State's got to get better at that. And maybe that's a Jerome Tang defensive philosophy. And look, that Baylor defense in the year they won the title and that 2-year stretch, which by all accounts Jerome Tang helped lead that defense. I mean, they were elite. But yeah, I just don't like the way they defend right now. To your point, I mean, Anienzo's got to be more productive than just, finishing around the rim. You got to have way more rebounds. You got to affect more shots. You got to block shots, so, and I don't get it. Like, this is a guy that was an elite shot blocker, and we have not seen that.
Well, and you brought up, or someone did, Flory Badunga has 9 rebounds in 25 minutes. Like, he just seemed like he was everywhere. He was always around the rim and just active, like total Energizer Bunny. Sometimes that energy seems like it's kind of flailing around a little bit and needs to be contained, but he's sort of like the opposite effect out there on the floor right now of Anienzo. And look, I think it's no secret that he's a guy that throughout a lot of this year has not been very engaged. I think it seems like they've had a hard time getting buy-in from him, but again, I would point to like 3 of the last 4 games, just finally saying, all right, like we're going to roll with this. We're going to play him. I guess they seem to have decided there's at least enough there. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm very optimistic about it, but he is to me one of the most maddening cases of this team, because again, you see the offensive efficiency and what he can add there. And it's like, dude, if he would give you half of that on the defensive end and on the glass, this would be a really effective piece.
There's 14 games left, conference games. I guess you have conference tournament as well. 14 regular season games left. I have no problem with them using that time, because he again, Coach Tang is again kind of brought up the Houston model and kind of wanting to do that. It's fine. Let's do that. I have no problem with them saying, okay, we have 14 games, maybe to still fix someone like a Ugonna Anienzo or even Doug McDaniel, because if you were to fix them and they start playing the brand of basketball that you need, that really sets you up for next year. It does. So I have no problem with using the last 14 games like that, because if it results in more disaster or more of an implosion, I mean, there's nothing really to lose if that continues to happen, as long as you're not impeding the development of some others that you really need to get going, like a David Castillo.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Saturday's game, for example, right? Now, of course, Moby doesn't play in that game, probably just too much for him in that atmosphere. But, what's interesting to me, guys, is obviously, like, I think we're probably done seeing Buddy Rich take the floor by now. I mean, you think you can see that?
It's 3 DMPs in a row, right? I know we've got some mixed
reasons. Yeah,
I know we've got some mixed three. It doesn't seem like just basketball.
Yeah, and then so we know C.J. Jones very close to Buddy Rich, right? And C.J. Jones, what was interesting to me is he plays 13 minutes at KU. He played 9 against Texas Tech. You're starting to see C.J. Jones minutes go down.
Yeah, and that's someone that started the 8 of the first 9 games of the year.
Yeah, 3 of his last 3 games, 16, 9, and 13 minutes. In fact, 3 of his 4 lowest minute totals on the season have occurred during this stretch, and he's a guy with eligibility left, and you're starting to see, like, all right, they're trying to identify here, who they maybe want back. And
not as a call out, and he kind of went efficient too, right? He made 2-point buckets. He was one of the reasons why they were good from 2-point range, and in a short amount of time, 13 minutes on the floor. It's going to seem like a call out, but like when I talk about the like guy who's fighting over the screen enough, like CJ Jones, someone's like, and maybe it's just the way he looks on the court. He could be giving 100% effort, and it just doesn't look like that. There's players like that. We thought that about Dean Wade sometimes. Like he kind of just seems like passive, but he's actually giving 100% effort, but it was just so effortless. Like, I don't know if that's what it is with CJ Jones. It might not be, but like, he's one guy that I wish is like, dude, just like take it up a notch.
Yeah.
Go to another gear, fight a little bit harder above that screen. And I wonder if those kinds of things are maybe some things that the coaching staff also feels, and that's why he's dropping out. I don't know, just throwing that out into the universe as a potential reason.
Could we file a waiver to get Max Jones back for another year? Because I do appreciate about Max is that he plays his ass off.
He plays his ass off. He's not the most gifted defender because he's not the most lateral athlete.
Yeah.
But like, he works hard enough on defense that he's enough on defense. If you have other good defenders around him, he annoys me at the rim, but he can shoot the three.
Yeah, you guys know my frustration sometimes with him at the rim and catching and letting the defense recover or kicking it out. But aside from that, I mean, he's a solid shooter. He's a solid shooter, and he plays hard, and I appreciate that about him. And so
he'd be a good piece to have next year if they could, if he did have another year, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
Well, we haven't said anything about Coleman Hawkins. You were about ready to, Kurtz, I think, but 10 assists and 1 turnover.
No, I wasn't. I was going to say they continue to play Doug, Cole, and do we think that Doug gives a lot of effort? We were just talking about CJ's effort on defense. I don't know what you think about Doug's effort there. Is that just hey, Doug is much more talented? Like, that's just, kind of one of those, this is how the world works, CJ. You're not as good as Doug, so there's a little more leeway.
There's part of that, and maybe I'm giving him too much leeway because the bar was low. But I do think the care factor and give a shit factor for Doug has increased a bit in the last month.
Yeah. Look, I mean, you would like to be able to return. You want to return some guys, and Jerome Things talked about that.
Yep.
And ideally, you want to return some guard play more than anything, right? Because if you can return guards and be guard heavy, like, you feel better about things. And the ideal scenario is that, again, we've talked about it before, and it just still feels unlikely to me, is that Doug McDaniel, the light bulb clicks finally in his career, and he gets the message from Jerome Tang. And yeah, he starts to play with the focus and energy that Tang wants out of his point guard. And then you get David Castillo back too, and I would expect Brendan Hassan to be back, who's a guy that cares. And then you got, a little nice core there if Doug actually bought in. But again, I think we're all going to have that question mark unless we see just things completely turn on a dime over the
and
last.
I think they're going to use their entire clock that they got to get that, right? Like, I think they're going to keep working at it for 14 more games with Doug, because I don't think putting Doug on a floor, as long as you're going to play him with David Castillo, is impeding anything for next year.
And Doug has to want to come back too, right? I mean, and I don't know what the relationship is like between him and Jerome Tang. I mean, Tang has called him out publicly multiple times, and Doug may not like that. And so, these guys do have to come back. It can't just be who K-State wants back. They've got to prove it to these guys, as well, to want to come back. And then you got to figure out who do you want to retain and who's going to move on. I mean, we talk about Ugonna Anienzo. This is a guy that came to K-State in my anticipation of thinking it was a 1-year deal, and then he was thinking he'd go pro. I mean, he talked about last year going through NBA workouts that he already thought he was a pro prospect, and that's what's so disappointing for a guy like him. I mean, you would think he'd be in prove-it mode. He's a junior, and he's had NBA aspirations, and he was a top 25 recruit out of high school and went to Kentucky, and it looked like things were starting to come on last year as a sophomore with the Wildcats. And then he comes to K-State, and you're thinking, all right, he's going to take that next step. And he just looked completely unmotivated. And so, like, where's the hunger in some of these guys? They just collecting a check and calling it good? Because if you have the dreams of wanting to go to the NBA, you got to prove yourself. And even this, I would say, guys, like, these guys should be hungry to prove themselves that have eligibility remaining, because if K-State doesn't take you back, you're costing yourself a lot of money, at the next school you might go to if you enter the portal. Because if you play like shit the last 10, 14 games here, who's going to want you? If they want you, they're not going to pay you as much as what your value might have been if you played really well. So these guys have to, they should have incentives to care.
It's a pretty good point on Ugo, because someone will take him. Like he's tantalizing. Someone will take him. But yeah, the value has gone way down from, what he'll be getting this year, which is a lot. So yeah, good point. Okay, DY, you brought up Coleman Hawkins. Look, Coleman Hawkins, he did what he does, 15 and 10.
Played all 40 minutes, but
not a super efficient game from the floor, but 15 and 10. Had to have him playing well, playing hard. The problem with Coleman Hawkins in this whole discussion is he's gone from like the most interesting at the beginning of the year, or like the biggest target for fans because the team was struggling, and he publicly, everybody knows how much money he's making, to now it's like we're in this development mode, and that Coleman Hawkins' career is done. Like he's not going to be coming back. So he becomes kind of like less interesting. You're like, yeah, he generally plays hard and plays well every night, but like what else is going on around him? And this season's lost now. What else can you bring back beside him? So it's kind of like, I don't mean to say shoulder shrug in terms of like, hey, I don't care, I don't appreciate it. I certainly do from Coleman Hawkins, but he's got a pretty professional attitude. Like, you're generally going to get a pretty good effort and a pretty good game out of him, and I would expect that the rest of the year.
Yeah, the uninteresting thing, I think that was the genesis of Mason's question that was also obviously interpreted probably incorrectly because of the way it came off, but it wasn't like, do you regret coming to Kansas State, right? It was like, this is kind of a lost season. You've played for NCAA tournament appearances. This year's not going to be that. So what can you do? What is these last 14 games for in a lost season of someone that's going to have their eligibility expire and not play college basketball again? Which is a fair question. And like you said, we kind of talked about it. He's like, I'm just going to keep competing and persevere and win as many games. And it kind of goes just to this professional attitude and why he's going to play basketball for money beyond this year.
Yeah, I think the phrasing probably needs to be better so it's understood more clearly. But I think the question, the intent of it was solid. This is a guy that only knows winning. He's been to the NCAA tournament all 4 years of his college basketball career. He's won a Big Ten championship in the regular season. He's won a Big Ten conference title. He's been to an Elite Eight. This is all new territory for a guy like Coleman Hawkins. So how do you handle it? And what do you do moving forward, knowing the NCAA tournament is off the books unless you have some sort of miracle Big 12 tournament run where you win 5 games in 5 days or however it's set up? I don't even know. And so, yeah, I think the question is fine. And look, I also think like with Coleman Hawkins, the way that he plays, he can't be your best player. He needs to be surrounded, and he's that glue guy that, needs a couple other guys that are really productive and really good. And you think about last year's Illinois team, you had Terrence Shannon and Marcus Domosk around him, 2 really good players, and then surrounded by a bunch of role guys. Like Coleman Hawkins can't be the focal point of an opponent. And for Kansas State, they just don't have enough talent around him, which we did not think was going to be an issue, clearly, but that's an issue. So, yeah, I think you're right, John. We're just not going to, like with Hawkins, like you hope he plays well. And look, talking about NBA aspirations, he's got incentive to play well too. It's not just this NIL paycheck this year. He's got the goals and dreams of going to the NBA. So there's that on the line for him as well. But we're probably not going to talk about Coleman as much. We're looking at guys that have eligibility remaining and looking for those glimmers of hope that can carry into next season.
And honestly, like I don't think Coleman's done much to really hurt his stock. He'll have to go prove it at NBA workouts and stuff, and hopefully stays healthy, because that was obviously a problem last year. But I wouldn't worry about that too much. I think he's handled himself well throughout this year. So I don't know, any final thoughts going into road trip to Waco this week?
There was I think I sent to you guys that what was that the question or whatever that we got on Twitter. I'm trying to find it in the tweet from last night. I just found it actually. So sorry for rambling a little bit. It's just the theory from the positive crowd is that this is kind of like Kansas football, right? You have the right coach, a talented team, but a rough start. Now they're turning the corner in a close game at the rival school. What's the minimum record over the last 14 games to justify the Sunshine Pumpers? This person says 8-6. To me, to me, I thought Jerome Tang actually hit the nail on the head in the last press conference. He was following the KU game. People are going to roll their eyes. They're going to be pissed off at it because wins and losses are supposed to matter. But wins and losses do not matter anymore for this year. Like, I know you guys said you want a little bit for the confidence or a little bit so you don't look like a disgrace when you recruit and stuff like that. Like, Missouri just went winless in conference games last year. It did not impede their ability to recruit in the offseason. Like, I think recruiting is so different that wins and losses the prior year don't necessarily matter anymore. It's more of a financial, what can you do for me on the court to help me get to the next level kind of thing, that prior seasons don't matter. So for me, wins and losses don't matter because of that. They also don't matter because I don't care if they're losing to Baylor or Arizona or Houston or Kansas the rest of the year. I want David Castillo to get better and whoever else is going to stay, whether it be Ugonna Yenso, Brennan Hazen, Doug McDaniel. Those guys can get better and better enough by the end of the season to make me feel better about next year and not win another game. So again, for me, the wins-losses record, the final 14 games is just not going to make a difference to me of how I feel about this team or how I feel about next year's team.
Yeah, I never can take the angle that wins don't matter, even in a lost season. So to me, winning is everything. And so I never have that mindset. I totally understand it. And I think that's probably, what a lot of people are thinking right now. But I still think you need to play well and need to find ways to win at various points. Like, you can't just go 1-19 in the league. I know Missouri did it, but I would guess that there's not a lot of other examples of just such drastic turnarounds that are out there. And so
I think they're more common now.
Yeah, I mean, you can that's the thing with the portal. You can turn things over quickly.
It's the new era. I just don't think it matters. Like, you could say there's not a whole lot. I bet there's going to be a ton of examples over the next decade.
Yeah. Look, K-State's 1-5 in the league, and they have home games against Oklahoma State, who's 2-4 in Big 12 play. They have a home game against Colorado, 0-6 in the league. 2 games against Arizona State, home and away. They're 1-5 in league play, 10-7 overall. You go to Baylor on Wednesday. All right, Baylor's lost back-to-back games. They just got beat on a 3 last night in Waco at home by TCU with 5 seconds left in the game. A starting point guard, Jeremy Roach, went down late in the game, took a shot to the head. He had a concussion earlier this year, so he had to be helped to the locker room. Would not be surprised if he misses the K-State game on Wednesday. But Baylor does have good guard depth with Jaden Nunn, Robert Wright, and Edgecombe at guard, so they can probably make up for it. Like, if you look at what Bart Torvik has, so the question that we got tweeted, if you look at what Bart Torvik has at Baylor, projected 14-point loss, West Virginia 7-point loss, Oklahoma State 6-point win, at Iowa State 21-point loss, at Arizona State 7-point loss, KU at home 9-point loss, Arizona at home 11-point loss, at BYU 14-point loss, at Utah 9-point defeat, Arizona State 1-point win, at UCF, 8-point loss, Colorado, 3-point win, and then at Cincinnati, a 10-point loss, and Iowa State projected 13-point loss. Only 3 wins projected in there. Bart Torvik ultimately projects K-State to win one of those closer games, and so has them at 5-15 in Big 12 play and 11-20 overall. But so the question about can they get to 8-6 the rest of the way and get to 9-11 and finish this out in Big 12 play, that's hard to see. Though I would say that a lot of your road games are in just daunting, intimidating atmospheres, though they've proven they can lose at any place.
They haven't won a road game since.
It was last year. They kept making a big deal about that. The last road broadcast, it's like 13 road games in a row.
It's 14 now with KU, and so I would say this too, guys. They need to end the road losing streak this year. You don't want to go into that.
Yeah, here it is. I will say that end the road losing streak. And to your point, you want enough improvement from guys to where you are going 1-19. Like, I wasn't that was a little hyperbolic. I wouldn't say go 1-19. I don't give a shit. But because if you accomplish what I wanted to accomplish, you're going to win some games anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I just don't think there's a certain benchmark.
They're not going 8-6. Like, I mean, I'm sorry, they're not going 8-6. They're not. This is not Kansas football. Like, I appreciate the analogy. Yeah. I can see the points that you are making. However, Jalen Daniels gives lots of shits, much more than anybody on this basketball team. Like, they not only did Kansas have talent, they had guys that really cared. Like those receivers, like Luke Grimm, Lawrence Arnold, like those guys play their butts off. Devin Neal, like. We don't have. That's not the basketball team. I'm sorry. So that is not there. Even if a switch flips for some guys, they don't have. They're not as talented as Kansas football was, and they certainly do not care as much as Kansas football did. So that's just I can't. Again, I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate trying to be positive. I think that's a very flawed premise.
I'll make two better comparisons, and I'll let Cole say what he wanted to, but. One, I keep bringing up Mizzou basketball last year. I think that's a little bit more apt. And if you want to do football, I think it's Florida State.
Yeah. I was just going to say on KU football, I mean, they were losing games that they were controlling and losing in the last possession of games, right? I mean, their awful start was lost by like a combined 10, 14 points in some of those games, combined 3 or 4 losses. And, Nick having to listen to this. So, I mean, K-State's gotten blown out by Wichita State, by Houston, just multiple times. LSU manhandled them, teams that probably aren't NCAA tournament teams crushing them. And so it's not that situation.
Yeah, Wichita State.
Yeah. So, anyways, I mean, I get the perspective and the analysis. I think Missouri, probably to DY's point earlier, is the better, comp if you're going to flip it. Missouri did it, and Missouri didn't have that attractive of a portal haul this offseason, right? I mean, I think we were even making fun of it a little bit. Like, they were taking so many bigs, and clearly it's worked, and maybe that's what K-State needs this next year, is maybe not this attractive portal haul that, like, just is all...
They had a retention too, right? I mean, weren't they just, said, screw it, we're going to keep some of these pieces that did go in whatever?
Tamar Bates, I know, is back, and then they had Aiden Shaw, I think, is back. So they kept a few guys.
It's like you're gonna take some lumps at some point, and yeah, you hope it's not like a offer, but like you take some lumps with guys, and you come back in a year or two, and it's sort of the Houston model that Tang's been speaking on, right?
Well, some of that too, Cole, was like they took Mark Mitchell, and it seemed like K-State's attitude was kind of like, we'll do better, and. I haven't watched Mizzou enough to know like what Mark Mitchell is doing. I don't.
He's gotten a little bit better every year. To be honest, he's a limited player, but his numbers get better every year.
Yeah, and Tamar Bates was a guy that heavily considered K-State. That I think K-State maybe could have taken. Indiana transfer, a KC native, ended up going to Missouri. That was a couple of years ago, and Bates is still there, and he's a really good shooter and a good player. And then, if you look at a guy like Terrace Reed at UConn, doing great, leads the Big East in rebounding, averaging 13 a game, a guy that was the first official visitor on campus, guys, when the portal opened for K-State. I remember being at a K-State baseball game. Terrace Reed walked in with the staff and the coaches. And, in hindsight, that would have been a pretty darn good take. So
some of it, though, you do have to ask. I mean, is it that they were better players, or is it that they're getting different coaching somewhere else? Because, Cam Carter looks pretty good, although I did just see that LSU's 1-4 in the SEC with their only win, a close win over winless Arkansas. But, Cam Carter looks pretty good elsewhere. Arthur Kaluma looks pretty good elsewhere. Whatever. We don't need to go down that road.
Fair question.
We've had that sort of discussion on these shows before. So, yeah. Try and keep things moving in a positive direction the rest of the year. Thanks to our friends at Holiday Distillery. Thanks to our friends at Home Field Apparel, as well as Alenco, alencohome.com, ALENCO home.com for all of your home improvement needs. Appreciate Nick Springer behind the scenes as well, keeping this thing on the rails. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you all soon, and take care.